Well, I got to tell you, I listen to, there's a iTunes radio station that's One Power Radio is what it's called, and it's all the Daniel Nahmod and Faith Rivera and Jamie Lula and all of those New Thought artists. And I was listening to that one day, and that song came on, and it was one of those moments where it just kind of instantly go, I got to hear Terry sing that. I got to hear Terry play that. I told Fred about it, and he goes, well, will that work with what you're talking about that day? I said, I'll make it work. I don't care. But I do. I think it was really appropriate because each one of us has heard that call. We've all heard the call to go deeper, to connect with God, to manifest that divine nature that we are. But we don't always know how. You know, we hear that, we know, I want to go deeper. But what sort of practices do we put in place to really allow ourselves to go deeper? To really allow ourselves to connect with the presence and power of God that we are? And that's what this Fall Faith series has been about. It's been about exploring a series of practices that will allow us to really connect with the source that we are, with the origin of God that lives within each one of us. And so we have these practices of, well, I'm sorry, I've gotten a little, is there anybody else out here who's just a little bit distracted right now? Just a few of you that maybe your mind is somewhere else, like at 7:07 tonight? Yeah. I'm glad it's not just me. So if you'll give me just 1 second, I'm just going to run through something here real fast. Just kind of pray amongst yourselves for a moment. And let's see here. So I'm feeling a little anxious and excited. So I'm aware of that. That's good. That's good. Can I accept it? Yeah, all right. So I can accept that I'm anxious and excited for the game tonight. Okay, so now do I forgive myself? Yeah, all right, I forgive myself for allowing my mind to wander. Okay, all right, good. All right, I'm back. So that's the practice we've been working on, that exact practice. When we have those moments where we catch ourselves thinking about something or pulled away from the intention that we have, we take the time to sit and explore why, and to look at whether or not there's anything that we need to forgive about what's going on. So those 3 steps, awareness, acceptance, and forgiveness, those are all internal practices that we do in any moment of any day. That's just for us to do with ourselves. Last week, though, we added the first one of these practices that relates to how we deal with all of us. We talked about the idea of being universally benevolent, of having this open heart and this feeling of goodwill towards the people around us in the world. And we talked about how that comes through taking time to feel appreciation, taking time to be kind, and then giving to the world through generosity. And then as we looked at that, what we realized was that that's just sort of a continual process, that as I'm inspired to be generous, that then the person I'm generous with is inspired to feel appreciation. And then out of appreciation grows kindness, and out of kindness grows a will to be generous. And so it spreads this idea of benevolence through the world. But it all starts with having that open heart. So that's what we talked about last week. This week, we'll talk about a practice that allows us to really work with the relationships around us in the most effective way possible. Because let's be honest, as humans, we're social animals, right? It will drive us absolutely crazy if we locked a human away, or if we locked ourselves away and didn't let ourselves interact with other people. We need relationships with other humans to survive. But how can we have those relationships in the deepest and most effective way possible? And that's where today's practice of compassionate communication comes into play. Now, before we go too far down the road of what compassionate communication is, I just want to share, and Robert mentions this in Living Originally, that compassionate communication is also, it's another name for a process known as nonviolent communication. And that's a process that was founded by a man named Marshall Rosenberg. The compassionate communication that Robert is talking about in Living Originally is not the same compassionate communication that Marshall Rosenberg talks about. It's not that nonviolent communication. It's a wonderful practice, and there's a lot of good that comes out of that practice, but Robert wanted to make sure that the distinction was made that his idea of compassionate communication is not the same as Rosenberg's. So enough about what it's not, let's talk about what it is. Compassionate communication is our ability to communicate deeply and honestly from the core of what we are, from the divine presence of God that we are. And this should be our intention in every interaction we have. And I say intention because I think it's important to note that we don't always communicate compassionately. And if we say, well, I'm going to do that all the time, and then those moments where we catch ourselves not communicating compassionately, we end up beating ourselves up because of it. So it's our intention to always communicate from that place of compassion, from that place of love, and that place of kindness within us. This idea of compassionate communication is actually broken down into two different processes. The first process is actually about the communication part of it. It's the speaking, the writing, the words that we say, the things we write, the tweets that we send out. And it's based in this idea, this Buddhist teaching that's known as right speech. It's the Buddhist teaching of right speech. And in this instance, right does not mean that it's the one and only way. It doesn't necessarily mean correct. What it means is anything that furthers a spiritual truth, anything that's right with a spiritual truth. So it's not the idea that this is the only way that we can speak and the only way we could be speaking going forward. It's the idea that this is the method of communication that best furthers our connection to God. And there are guidelines that come with this idea of right speech. And those guidelines are in the form of 3 questions. And questions are, is it true? Is it kind? And is it necessary? Is it true? Is it kind? And is it necessary? So when we speak, we can check in with ourselves about these questions. So let's just take a look at each one and see how that can integrate itself into our life. So the first guideline, this idea of, is it true? So when we speak something, we check in with ourselves. We ask ourselves if what we said was true when we said it. Did we share something that we knew was not true? The most common way to say is, did I knowingly lie? Or did I share something that I was maybe questionable about how true it was, but I went ahead and spoke it like it was true? I used to do that all the time down at Union Station. People would ask me a question, and I would just think, well, they're asking. I don't know, so. Yeah, sure, snakes have five-chambered hearts. But by that standard of right speech and that question of, is it true? Well, the right response would have been, I don't know. So that's that first standard. We don't speak things that we knowingly are aware of not being true. And if we speak something as true and later find out that that wasn't the case, we make every effort to correct the error. Now, don't misunderstand me. There's more to this than just being honest. Because the real spiritual work comes when we look at why we shared something that wasn't true. Let me give you an example. If I go over to a friend of mine's house for dinner and he makes a lasagna and we sit down to eat and he goes, well, what did you think? I go, oh, that was great. And in my mind, I'm thinking, you used way too much garlic. Now, I might look at that and go, well, I just said that because I was being polite or I wanted to be nice. But if I really want to do the spiritual work involved, I can ask myself, why didn't I feel like being honest with my friend? Why didn't I want to share the truth with them? Was it because I was afraid that if I did, they wouldn't like me anymore? Or they'd think I was mean? Or not loyal? Or not a good friend? And then once I answer those questions, well, then I'm able to look at, well, why is this important to me? Is it more important that I'm honest, or is it more important that I protect my friend's feelings? And only you can answer that question at any moment, and it varies moment to moment. Certainly there are times where the best response is, yeah, that was great. But the important part of this practice is that we check in with ourselves, and we know why we felt the need to not speak a true statement. Now, there are two things that I think we need to be aware of with this notion of is it true? The first is our opinions. Because the thing I said when I was talking about this is that we don't speak things that we know are not true or that we know may not be true as truth. And a lot of times that happens with our opinions. We have values and beliefs about certain things, and we want to speak those beliefs, and they may or may not be true. So is it okay to still share my opinion? Of course, absolutely. Absolutely stand up with zeal and enthusiasm and state your belief in things for the way you see them to be. But this notion of right speech has a catch for you. And that catch is that when you speak those opinions, speak them as if you know it's an opinion. Ask yourself, how attached am I to this being the only right way? Am I willing to enter into a dialogue with somebody and change my mind if I find out more information? There's absolutely nothing wrong with standing up loudly and proudly for our viewpoints, as long as we understand that it's our viewpoint. And as long as we understand that we have to be willing to be open to that dialogue with other people. Now, the other thing that comes up with this idea of is it true is how truthful do I honestly have to be with somebody? Do I have to say something that might hurt their feelings or would otherwise upset them? And that's where the second question of right speech comes in. Is it kind? So first we ask, is it true? And then we ask, is it kind? And I want you to know that there is more to being kind than being polite, nice, and politically correct. Those are wonderful values to have. They're wonderful qualities to have. But they have a tendency to be a very superficial quality, as opposed to that quality of kindness. That quality of kindness that comes from your heart. That comes from opening up your heart and really meeting somebody at that same level of God that's looking right back at you. Of opening up your heart and appreciation for somebody else. Of being generous with your time and your talent. And so before you speak, you can look at that and say, is what I'm saying, did that come from a place where my heart was open? Or was I just responding and reacting from my own mental conditions? So we ask ourselves, is it kind? Is my heart open when I shared this? And then there's the final guideline, the final question of right speech, and that's the idea of, is it necessary? Is it necessary? You know, there are a lot of things in this world that we could say that are true and that are kind, but we have no business sharing them with the world. We don't necessarily need to speak them. And so just to give you kind of a base guideline for this, the answer to whether or not something's necessary is, does it help lead to my spiritual transformation? What's my goal in saying this? Am I saying it to deepen somebody else's experience, to deepen my connection to them? Am I saying it to help them in a situation? Or does this statement come from a more selfish point of view? Does it serve to inflate my own ego about how I feel about me? Or am I trying to get somebody to see my point of view without paying attention to their point of view? Is it necessary? Is it necessary for our spiritual growth that this is stated? So that's the first part of compassionate communication. It's the speaking part. We make our intention to speak things that are true, to speak things that are kind, to speak things that are necessary. And if it doesn't fit into those three, we don't speak it. But communication takes more than just talking. We have to listen, too, to communicate. And so the second half of compassionate communication is deep intentional listening. Is deeply listening to the person that we're communicating with, that we're having the interaction with. And there's 4 different ways of listening. And there's 4 ways that we can listen and open our hearts to somebody. And I had a realization when I was working on this, because previously I'd always assumed that there's the base level of listening and then each one was better than the other. And what I realized is that that's not the case at all. There's not like this high level of listening that we should all be working on getting into 100% of the time. But there's 4 different ways that we listen to people that we have conversations with. And our job is to be aware of how we're hearing and listening to any particular person and why. So those 4 things, those 4 levels of listening that we can all experience, and we move in and out of these several times throughout our day. But the first and most basic level of listening is simply hearing. We do that all the time. We just hear. You don't understand what's being said, but you can tell somebody's talking. I do this all the time when I'm driving and Sarah's in the car with me and Harper's in the back seat. And I'm trying to be careful because I know even though she's not here today, she'll watch this. You don't listen to me. Well, no. I have the 2 most important people in my world in the car. And I have thousands of crazy people flying past me at 70, 80 miles an hour and cutting me off and going around me. I'm not paying attention to what they're saying. I'm paying attention to what's going on around me. So I can hear that she's talking, but I'm not really listening to it. Just as an aside, I have agreed to more while driving in the car than I ever want to. Yeah, sure, that sounds great. And then a little bit later, oh, remember you said you would do, no. This is also the same type of listening that a lot of times you see happening in a political debate. When you can watch one candidate as another one speak, and you can see the wheels spinning in their head as they're formulating their response to what the other person's saying. They're not really listening to what's being said. They hear them. They have to hear them, otherwise they don't know when it's their turn to talk next. But they don't really listen. So that's that basic level. That's that hearing level. Now, the next level of listening is just a step above that. And that's where we have a conversation, we have an interaction, and it touches us just on an intellectual level. We might learn something, we might enjoy the conversation, but we're not going to be transformed at depth. And this is the level of listening that almost all of us are operating in probably 90 to 100% of the time. It's the basic level that we're all working through. And there's a good reason for that, because not every conversation that you have is going to be transformative. I'm not saying it's not going to happen, but chances are the conversation you have with the person in line at Target isn't going to change your soul at depth. So we have that level of listening, though, where we're able to engage with them and talk with them and have a pleasant conversation and then move on with our day. Then we get to that third level. And this third level of listening is the level of listening that we're striving for in all of our personal relationships. This is the level of listening that allows us to really connect with that part of us, that God within us, that transforms us at depth. It's that part where we really intently hear what that family member, that friend, is asking for us. And we're able to respond to their needs because we listened with an open heart. You see, that's the main difference between that second and third level, is whether or not your heart is open. We open our heart through kindness, through being kind. So when we have that kindness involved as we're listening to somebody and our heart's open, then we're able to truly have a relationship that allows us to be transformed. Now, like I said, this is not the same type of listening that you're going to use in everyday life. This is the type of listening that's utilized when you're in a conversation with your spouse, your partner, with your dear friend. It's also the type of listening that's used by psychiatrists and psychologists in therapy sessions. And it's used because it allows us to open our heart to the truth of what we are. So we make the commitment to listen at that level when we have those conversations with our intimate friends and family. And then there's the fourth stage of listening. Now, so far, these first stages of listening, you can practice any one of those regardless of whether the person you're talking to is practicing compassionate communication or not. They don't have to be practicing this at all for you to listen to them deeply. But the last stage of listening, it takes both of you. Because this is the stage of listening where you open up to that presence of God within you. And you allow that presence of God to co-create the interaction, the communication between the two of you. You listen to the guidance that you receive, that little nudge that says, go ahead and put a hand on their shoulder right now. You connect with that presence. And you allow it to support you in listening deeply to the person in front of you. And if you'd like to experience that type of listening, I'd like to invite you to come talk with one of our prayer chaplains. In fact, they didn't know I was going to do this, but would our prayer chaplains stand? These prayer chaplains are available for one-on-one prayer following each and every service. You'll find them in the sanctuary. They're in the lobby. They're down the hall by the Peace Chapel. They're down with the coffee and the donuts. And yeah, you can be seated. And I know that these chaplains have been trained to listen to you from that level of listening with the ears of God, so that they can truly support you as you go through whatever it is that you're going through. You know, the most difficult part about listening with this fourth level, this divine level of listening, is that you have to open yourself up to become vulnerable. You have to open yourself up to look at why you do certain things that you do and how. It's not easy to do. But the prayer chaplains are here to hold you in that place of prayer while you do it, and to hold that confidence with what you share with them. So these are the two practices of compassionate communication. We utilize that Buddhist notion of right speech, asking ourselves, is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? And then we make our intention to compassionately listen. To listen at that level where our heart is wide open. So just as before, there have been a general form of the practice and a formal form of the practice. And with this practice, because it relates to how we have relationships with other human beings, the general form of the practice is actually the main way we interact with compassionate communication. And that general form is that we just set our intention. We set our intention to communicate compassionately, following those 3 questions. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? And we set our intention to listen. And then we pay attention. We utilize our awareness. And we notice times when maybe I spoke something that wasn't true. Why did I speak that in that conversation? Don't worry about before you say something, having to run through that list in your head. Like after the service, when Bruce comes up to me and we start talking, and he says, well, you did a nice job. Here are some things that maybe you could work on. I don't worry about, okay, now I'm going to respond to him. Is what I'm going to say true? Is it kind? And is it necessary? No, we just communicate as normal. But what this general practice asks us to do is to review those communications. And then ask ourselves, is what I said true? Was it kind? Was it necessary? And if the answer to any of those questions was no, what do you think the next thing you ask yourself is? Why? Why did I feel the need to respond differently in that situation? Why didn't I listen differently in that situation? And the more we answer those questions, the more it starts to point to those things that are within us, that have been there for so long, that reminded us that we're separate from God, that reminded us that we need to not respond honestly to our friends so we don't hurt our feelings because we need our friends in our life. And then we're able to do something about those hidden emotions, those hidden feelings. But that only happens if we explore why we're communicating in this way. So that's the general form. And the formal form of the practice, we're actually going to need to find a buddy, find a compassionate communication buddy. Maybe there's somebody in your small group, or there's just another really close friend. And then it's up to you if you want to check in moment to moment, if you want to check in at the end of the day, if you want to check in at the end of the week. But you just run through, here are the intentions I set, and here was what my experience was. And you have that discussion with them about ways you were out of alignment and when you were in alignment and what you noticed from that. Being able to bounce these ideas off of somebody helps you find those little insights. And if you don't find someone that you want to share this with, you can journal it. That's okay. Some of these things are these personal details that you don't want to share with someone else. That's okay. But maybe take 30 minutes and write down in your journal what your experience was. Because it's only through looking at what we experienced and why that we're able to truly move forward and heal. And once we're able to truly move forward and heal, that's when we're able to live originally. That's when we're able to live from the source of what we are. Now next week we're going to wrap up Fall Faith. And we're going to look at how all of these practices together, all 5 of these practices, come together to allow us to become the author of our own life. And we have a very special guest that's going to be joining us next week. Robert Brummett is going to be here with us. And he's going to be available during the service to answer any questions that we have. I know I have a couple for him, but if you have questions you would like to ask Robert, he'll be here to answer those questions during the service. He's also going to make himself available to sign his book, so bring your copy of Living Originally with you, and he'll be available after both services to sign that and just greet you. This is the first time he's been back to Unity Church of Overland Park as our speaker since he was our senior minister in 1988, I think was when. So 27 years, so almost as long as we've gone without a World Series. This platform has gone without Robert Brummett. So he'll be back here next week to talk with us and to provide some of those insights with us. So I'll see you next week.